Hi, my name is Rich Schmidt. I'm here with Vivian Weber. We're at the Nicholson Library at Linfield College. It's June 10th, 2019. Thanks so much for joining us, Vivian. We appreciate this.
Thank you.
Let's start you off by asking why wine, or in your case, why grapes?
Well, I mean, it's a long story. My husband and I were living in Boston, and he was in the textbook, university level textbook business. Prindle, Weber and Schmidt, you're too young to know about that, but it was mainly a math textbook company. And I was in, and still am, in the travel business. And I was working in a travel agency in Boston. And since Arthur was in the marketing area of the company, very small company, he traveled all over the place. So in one of his stops in the country, he came across David Lett, who was working for Scott's Foreman, or something like that. And they had a conversation. They met probably in some professor's office. And Arthur had been a University of Oregon grad, so he knew the territory. And so they got talking, and David started telling Arthur what a wonderful place it was to grow grapes. And Arthur got enthused. As being a wine aficionado in Oregon, liked to get together with friends and match food and wine together. So we were going to go to Europe and on a vacation, and he said, no, let's go to Oregon. So off we went to Oregon, and we stayed with a friend of his near Portland, and he decided he was going to find David Lett. And knowing that David Lett was in Dundee, and at the time there was a gas station at the bottom of the hill. I think it was also before your time, but anyway, it's where the Radiator place is. And we stopped there, and we asked if we could find David Lett, and the man said, no, I don't know. I'm glad I don't know, because if I knew, I'd have to lie and say I don't know, because he doesn't want anybody visiting him. So Arthur said, well, they always grow grapes on hills, so off we went up the hill on 9th Street, which turns into Warden Hill Road, and we got to a place where there was this very sort of funny, torn out of a box sign on a pole that said acreage for sale. And he said, I know this is David Lett's house. So in we went. Well, it happened to be Jim Marsh. And so in we went to Jim Marsh's house, and they said, yes, we have this land, and well, to make a long story short, we ended up buying 21 acres. And I kept saying, but Arthur, we live in Boston, why do we want 21 acres in the middle of nowhere in Oregon? And he said, no, it's just an investment. Well, 2 years later, we were out here, packed everything in our Volkswagen Bug, and drove cross country. So that was the start of that. And of course, none of us, including David Lett, Dick Erath, and all those guys, none of us knew what we were doing. So you couldn't translate California knowledge into Oregon grape growing. It just doesn't happen, because totally different.
Sure. So let's talk about that transition from buying acreage in Oregon to actually moving out here and deciding that's what you're going to do. So what was the move like? What was the transition like?
Well, I came kicking and screaming. It was not something I wanted to do, but I mean, I had no clue, really. I had no clue. And he left his job, I left my job, and we had no money, and so we just, we were in our 30s, and so it was adventure. That's what it was. And then soon as we got here, we left in July of '74. We had bought the land in '72. And so when we got here, we had met Dick, and so Dick decided that he would let Arthur work. And so I didn't have anything to do, and pretty soon my ex-travel agency in Boston said, how would you like to start taking tours? So that's what I started doing. So I started taking tours all over the world, and Arthur then was wooed by Wadsworth Publishing Company. I don't know if you know who they are. They're in Belmont, California, and they bought Prenda Weber and Schmidt and also hired Arthur to start their international program. So he was flying back and forth to Belmont, and I was flying back and forth to everywhere. and we had this piece of land. And so in 1975, we planted 3 acres of Riesling, because that's what we thought grew here. And then the next year, '76, we planted 3 acres of Pinot Noir, because I think we got a better handle on what really did grow here. And then I was in Hong Kong, and in 1976, Arthur called and said, hey, there's a house and 65 acres available adjacent to our property, and what do you think? Shall I buy it? I said, I don't know. You know, we don't have any money. How can we buy all this stuff? Well, anyway, he figured it out, and we bought an old, dilapidated farmhouse and 65 acres. So then we had 86 acres. And so we started planting Pinot Noir and Pinot Gris. And let's see, I think it was 1984, Arthur turned 50, and he decided he was going to retire. So then he was more at home, and I was flying still all over the place, and devoted himself more to the marketing of the grapes, since we weren't going to make wine. And Oak Knoll was one that we started with. Dick, of course, Erath, and some other people, smaller wineries. And eventually we sold to Rex Hill, and mainly Rex Hill.
So you mentioned coming here and you guys not knowing anything about growing grapes, and people who are here not really knowing anything about growing grapes, and how California didn't really translate to Oregon style winemaking. So how did you learn grape growing the right way in Oregon?
I think mainly it was being mentored by Dick Erath, who was experimenting with different rootstocks and varieties, clones, and I think it was just trial and error. And we're dry farmers, which is something that there's the dry farmer guys, and then there's the irrigation guys. So we're still dry farming, so our roots go down to China.
And why did you decide to do that?
I don't really know. I think it was, again, Dick must have thought that that was the better way. I think maybe in Germany, he has roots in Germany, that he felt that irrigation wasn't the way to go. I mean, I don't think Europe irrigates, so I think we were going after the European model rather than the California model. And it worked for us.
Did you have difficulty selling your grapes at any point? Were you always able to find buyers for your grapes?
Well, there was a point where, you know, nobody thought that anything good was coming out of Oregon. And so I think we sold some to King Estates, who they were down in Eugene. And I think we also sold juice to somebody in East. But for the most part, I think Arthur did a pretty good job of finding out who needed what and that kind of thing.
Was there obviously you came in when the industry really didn't exist as an industry yet, and you saw it grow up. Was there a moment when you felt like you were doing the right thing? You had this down and you were in the right place?
Well, I think David Lett's New York moment. I think that gave us all the confidence that we were in fact doing the right thing. And also, I think people started getting the idea that we were a cool climate, weather, growing region, and that it worked in other places, and New Zealand being one. So, yeah.
When you were deciding, you talked about planting Riesling first and then kind of getting into Pinot Noir almost immediately after that. Did you decide what to plant based on what you thought would sell, or did you decide based on what you thought would grow?
More what would grow. And also, yes, what would grow.
And you were able to get them to grow pretty well from the start?
Oh yeah, no problem, no problem. Actually, we had more fruit than we grow now. You know, it became obvious that we were overproducing, and we had to cut back on our pruning.
Another lesson to learn along the way.
Right,
yes.
right.
At what point, so you mentioned David Lett's New York moment in it was 1979 or 1980?
I think, yeah.
Was that when it felt like there actually was an Oregon wine industry to speak of?
Well, there weren't that many of us in the industry, and we formed a little group, and it was Myron Redford of Amity that said, you know, we need to market outside of Oregon. We need to start looking at other places to sell our wine. It's not just Oregon. We're going to pretty soon, even then, have a supply for everybody, or oversupply.
So tell me about that effort then to market outside of Oregon.
You know, I went to meetings because Arthur was on the road, and there was a lot of talk about sending salespersons out to different states, and I think we we targeted Washington and California just because of the proximity and the fact that they also were growing grapes. And but other than that, I can't tell you more. I wasn't involved in any of that marketing effort.
Okay. So we talk a lot about the early days, and we hear a lot about the kind of collaborative aspect of the industry. So tell me about that. Tell me about kind of growing up together in the industry and kind of figuring things out along the way.
Well, everybody helped everybody else, which was lovely. I know you had Gary here, but he was the first person we borrowed a tractor from. So it was really everybody helping everybody else. And if anybody had a problem, we all talked about it or tried to help each other resolve it, whatever it was. It was a very small, close community of people, and I think it was a lovely time, actually.
Do you have an idea why the industry was that close growing up? I mean, it didn't have to be. You guys were all sort of competing with each other at the same time also, or at least a lot of people technically were. So why the collaborative aspect? Why did the people come together so well?
I think there was passion. I think it was passion. I think we all were working for the same end, and I don't think there was a competitive spirit involved. I still, even today, with all the corporate wineries coming in, I still think that there's not as much, but there's still a cooperative effort that anybody needs help, as was experience with the fellows from the Rogue Valley this last harvest.
Right. So tell me about the vineyard grows into the 1980s, and then you kind of realize you're overproducing and you prune back a little bit. So tell me about kind of the evolution of the vineyard after your expansion to 80 acres and sort of what came next after that.
Well, I think as the different winemakers started making wine and trying to make really premium wines, they instructed the wine growers that they needed to do 2 to 2.5 tons per acre, as opposed to what we might have been doing in the past. So it was mostly realizing that you could really make better wine by having a smaller production.
And you developed a lot of relationships, obviously, with winemakers and wine owners around the area. Tell me about how those relationships sort of started and grew and matured over the years. Well,
the interesting part, at least now, is that a lot of the friendship that evolved from having wineries and grape growers working together rather than against each other. I think that some people, like the Ponzis, the Sokolblosser, the second generation is coming in, and they have the same respect for the other winemakers and wine growers, and we're not sure at this moment. Nothing radical has happened, but it is disappointing in one sense that you have absentee owners. This is something that is affecting the neighborhoods, the community of people in the neighborhoods, where you had mom and pop and the kids. Now you have somebody who comes from California or Canada or the East Coast who have local people running it and don't have families and kids growing up and working in the vineyards. It's just a different thing. And there's still those of us that started and are still in it, but I think a lot of people are getting tired. It's been a long time.
Sure.
And I'm lucky because I have a vineyard manager, and he takes care of most everything, and I don't have to go out there and prune and and pick and do all of those things, or even figure out where to sell the grapes. He does all of that. So, and Jim Marsh has his grandson and his daughter. So, and it's just a different than somebody flying in from Washington, D.C. Periodically to see how things are going.
And you mentioned Jim Marsh and Dick Erath and some others, and I know that you're still close with all of them, and
Yes.
in fact have a club together. So tell us about kind of how that has evolved over the years and why you stay so close.
I think we are all really good friends, and we have a club that gets together once a month. We try once a month, and it rotates to different houses. And so Dick Erath, Gary, John Davidson from Walnut City, Jerry, who had Jerry Koschel, who had Crumpled Rock, which is now Furioso, and Jim Marsh, Jim McDaniel, Carrie's dad. So it's lovely because I mostly don't say much, but they like to tease each other, and it's very fun, and it's great for them also to not sit at home and look at the flies or whatever.
To have a reason to get together.
Yeah.
So I'm curious, when that group talks about the state of the industry today, what are they talking about?
Well, I guess it depends on which one you're speaking to. Dick is still making wine for himself. Jerry is retired into McMinnville, and Gary's retired. He was an amateur winemaker. He never did it professionally. He had a vineyard and then sold. And John Davidson has vineyards and a winery and is still in the business. And Jim McDaniel got out of the business a long time ago, but loved the industry and remains friendly with those, particularly Argyle, because he was involved with Argyle. So, I don't know. I think there's a deep respect for those we were all together with a joint goal, I think. The winemakers and the wine growers, grape growers.
So we talked a lot about sort of you talked about the changes and kind of the absentee ownership, out of state interests. So is that the biggest change you've seen in the industry since you got into it, or is there something else that's noticeably different aside from just pure size?
I think the quality of wine is much better than it was in the beginning, and I think rivals almost any other region. And people come specifically to the Willamette Valley to taste the Pinot Noir that I think is really so good that people fly in all the time. I mean, tourism is great, and that's another thing. There's a lot of money coming in from tourism to the whole area, so it's hotels, bed and breakfast, restaurants. It's certainly way different than when we first started. I mean, there wasn't really a good restaurant except Nick's in the area. So
Difficult to imagine now.
yes, I know, I know.
So as you look back, what are you proudest of your accomplishments in the Oregon wine industry? What is it you kind of think fondly about?
I just marvel at the people who came here early on, my husband and all the other people, and just the vision that they had for this area, which it was totally new thing, and they just were able to invest energy into making it a really viable industry, and they wanted to protect the wine industry. So truth in labeling was very important, and I think the integrity of the wine industry in Oregon is very high.
Do you have a notion for where that came from? Because that was a really early concept in the industry, the
Yes.
land use protection, the labeling protection.
Right.
Do you have an idea why that was such an important early concept for you?
I think that we all wanted to protect the agricultural land use in the area, and I think we are all upset when somebody tries to come in and upset that. Most recently was the San Michel trying to build a huge facility in the Dundee Hills, which I guess if they had researched it would figure that they don't really have the infrastructure for that into a agricultural residential area. And but I think we all wanted a lovely place to live and work.
It's a pretty good motivation.
Yeah. Yeah.
So as you look to the future of the Oregon wine industry, what do you see on the horizon as you look, say, 10 or 20 years down the road? What do you foresee the wine industry looking like?
Well, I tell you what I hope I don't see. I hope I just don't see hill after hill with grapes. And why I mean that is that I'm afraid of a monoculture, that if somebody gets some kind of disease, it would wipe out everybody. And so I like the fact that you might have a forest in between grape growing areas, or some diversity of some sort. And I would hope that people would see that would be not only maintain the beauty of the land, but also it's a good agricultural method. As far as what I see in 20 years, I really don't know, because there's so many new wineries, and I don't know if our industry is going to overproduce itself right out of business. I have no idea. I mean, I don't know. I don't know.
It's a good answer.
Yeah. I don't have the crystal ball.
So if you had, you kind of talked about what you hoped you won't see. Do you have what you hope you will see? Talk about diversity of landscape. Do you have kind of the industry, hopefully the industry will look like this in 20 years in terms of like size, in terms of production? No?
I don't have any idea about or hopes. I hope that the industry, the small grower and winery, will be able to survive in the midst of the large corporate buildings, land use, acre upon acre. So I'm hoping that we can coexist with each other, because the large industries offer something, and the small little wineries and grape growers offer something else. So I think we hopefully all of us will survive and help each other out. I think that's the big thing, is to be hand in hand helping.
I like that. So the last question I have for you, you guys came here really early on in the industry. So as you look back, what is it like to know that you played kind of an instrumental role in the very formation of this industry?
It's awesome. It's funny because, as you come and try to do something and have no idea what the end result's going to be. And I think I feel very blessed that our vineyard is respected by a lot of people. I have people coming up and saying, we love the Weber wine, and as you know, there are several winemakers that label it Weber Vineyard Designate, which means that that's 100% our grapes, and that is very satisfactory, and it's nothing I dreamed of. And the only thing I'm sorry about is that my husband isn't around to experience it, because it was his dream. Well,
thank you. That's all the questions that I have for you. Is there anything else I should have asked you? Anything else you'd like to mention here?
I don't think so. Okay. I don't think so.
Well, thank you so much for your time and for your answers, and we'll let you off the hook.
Okay.